In a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other, there lived a young woman who loved music more than anything else. From the earliest days she could remember, the piano had been her closest companion. The old upright piano in the corner of the living room was worn and scratched, and its keys sometimes stuck or produced a faint, uneven sound, but to her, it was the most beautiful instrument in the world. Every afternoon, after finishing her daily chores and schoolwork, she would sit down and let her fingers wander across the keys, playing melodies that came straight from her heart. Her life was simple. Her home was modest, with walls that had seen better days and furniture that had been passed down for generations. The neighborhood was quiet, and most people went about their daily lives without much excitement. Despite this, she found joy in little things. The birds that sang outside her window, the way sunlight fell on the floor in the afternoon, and, most of all, the music she could create with her piano. While others in the town spent their free time talking or playing sports, she would retreat to her small corner and play, often losing herself completely in the sound of her own music. From a young age, she showed a natural sense of rhythm and melody that amazed anyone who listened closely. Her parents noticed her talent, but, like everyone else in the town, they underestimated just how extraordinary it could be. To them, she played beautifully, but she seemed content with simple songs, ones that anyone could follow if they practiced enough. They saw her practice diligently, yet they assumed that she was just playing ordinary tunes, not realizing that she was quietly experimenting, finding her own voice, and discovering nuances that went far beyond what they could imagine. School was a different story. She attended the local school where her teachers were kind but mostly focused on the standard subjects. Music was considered more of a hobby than a serious pursuit, and she was often encouraged to focus on other areas, like math or literature. Even so, she could not ignore the calling of the piano. She practiced during breaks, when other students were playing outside, and sometimes she would hum softly to herself in class, imagining melodies that only she could hear. Her notebook was full of scribbles of notes and small compositions, little pieces of music that no one else understood, but that filled her with pride and excitement. Neighbors and friends occasionally heard her play. Some would peek into the window and smile at the sweet sounds coming from inside, assuming she was simply playing the simple tunes that everyone expected. A few friends who were curious would ask her to play something more challenging, but she would only smile and nod, playing just enough to please them without revealing the depth of her skill. She enjoyed keeping that part of herself a secret, a hidden treasure that she alone fully understood. One day, the local community center announced a small music event. It was not a big deal, just a gathering where residents could showcase their talents. The young woman's parents encouraged her to participate, thinking it would be fun for her to play a few simple songs in front of a friendly audience. The other performers were mostly children and teenagers, some singing, some playing guitars, and a few playing the piano like her. The expectation was clear. Everyone assumed that she would perform something gentle and simple, something easy to enjoy and forget about afterward. She did not mind the expectations. In fact, she found them comforting. There was no pressure to impress anyone, and that allowed her mind to relax and focus purely on the music. She spent the week before the event practicing, not flashy tricks or complex pieces, but refining her melodies, exploring subtle changes in tone, and experimenting with rhythms that only she could hear. The worn piano at home became a laboratory for her creativity, where each key and chord was a brushstroke on the canvas of her imagination. As the day of the event approached, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She had performed in front of family and a few neighbors before, but never for a larger group of people. She wondered how they would react, though part of her hoped they would simply enjoy the music and leave it at that. Her parents reassured her with gentle smiles, proud of her courage but not fully aware of the level of talent they had at home. The night before the event, she could hardly sleep, her mind replaying different melodies, imagining how her hands would move, and thinking about how she could make even the simplest notes sing with emotion. On the day of the performance, she arrived at the community center. Early, the room was modest, with folding chairs and a small stage at the front. People chatted quietly, some greeting friends, others browsing the small display of local crafts. She carried herself with calmness, though inside, her heart raced. She found a spot near the piano, lightly touching the keys and feeling their familiar texture. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe, letting the music already present in her mind flow naturally into her fingers. When it was her turn, the audience did not expect much. They had seen her before, and in their minds, she was going to play the same simple, pleasant tunes as always. She began softly, with delicate notes that seemed to float in the air. People nodded politely, smiling at the familiar sounds, but they did not yet realize what was about to happen. With each passing moment, her music began to grow richer, more intricate. Her fingers moved with surprising speed and precision, dancing across the keys in patterns that seemed impossible for someone who had been underestimated. Every chord, every pause, every rise and fall of the melody was filled with emotion, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. It was not just her speed or accuracy that amazed people, but the feeling she poured into each note. The simple songs that had started the performance transformed into something breathtaking, layers of melody and harmony that conveyed stories, emotions, and experiences far beyond her years. People stopped chatting, leaning forward in their chairs, completely absorbed. Some held their breath, afraid to break the spell, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. It was as if the piano had become a living, breathing thing, and she was merely the channel through which its soul spoke. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment, everyone trying to process what they had just heard. Then, the applause erupted, loud and heartfelt. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering, unable to contain their astonishment. They had expected a simple performance, a light, pleasant tune, but what they had witnessed was something extraordinary, a display of skill and emotion that seemed to come from another world. Even her parents, who had known her talent all along, were moved to tears, realizing that their quiet, modest daughter possessed a gift far beyond what they had imagined. After the performance, people came forward to compliment her, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling with admiration. A few local musicians, who had performed in other events before, whispered to each other, clearly impressed by the depth and complexity of her playing. She accepted the compliments with quiet humility, feeling a mixture of pride and joy, but also knowing that this was only the beginning. The piano had always been her sanctuary, and now, it had become her voice in the world. That day marked a turning point. People began to see her differently, no longer assuming that her music was simple or ordinary. Word of her performance spread through the town, and invitations to play at other events started to arrive. But more importantly, she discovered the power of her own dedication and creativity. She realized that talent could remain hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine, and that the expectations of others could never define what she was truly capable of. In her heart, she felt a quiet determination to continue exploring, practicing, and letting her music grow, knowing that each note she played could touch someone's life in a way words never could. Even as the excitement of the event settled, she returned home to her old piano, the keys familiar and comforting under her fingers. She played late into the night, experimenting with new melodies, trying out ideas that had come to her during the performance, and feeling the joy of discovery with every chord. Outside, the town was quiet again, and the stars shone gently in the sky, but inside that small room, a young woman's music had begun to change the way people would see her forever. Her journey was only beginning, and she felt ready for everything that lay ahead, knowing that her piano was not just an instrument, but a doorway to endless possibilities and a way to express the deepest parts of herself that words could never reach. After the small performance at the community center, the young woman returned home with a quiet sense of satisfaction. People had applauded, praised, and expressed astonishment, but she did not let it fill her with pride in a way that would make her careless. Instead, she felt a calm sense of purpose. She realized that while some had finally seen her talent, she still had much to explore, learn, and express. Her piano remained her closest companion, a friend that listened without judgment and allowed her to discover the depths of her own creativity. In the days that followed, neighbors began to pay more attention. Some would stop by, offering kind words and encouragement, while others simply watched her from a distance, curious but hesitant to interrupt. Everyone in the small town had expectations, and most expected her to continue playing the simple, sweet melodies that they had first heard. They did not yet realize that she was capable of far more than what anyone had imagined. In quiet moments, she would think about how easily people underestimated others, assuming they were simple or ordinary based on appearances alone. She had learned that true skill was often hidden beneath modesty, and she liked that sense of mystery. School had returned to its usual rhythm. Some classmates whispered about her performance, surprised that someone they considered ordinary could play with such emotion and skill. They approached her with curiosity, asking questions about her practice, her favorite songs, and how she had learned to play so well. She answered politely, not boasting or showing off, but she could see in their eyes a mix of admiration and disbelief. Her teachers, too, had noticed a difference. They complimented her but still encouraged her to focus on her studies, unaware of the full extent of her potential. Her parents were supportive in quiet, loving ways. They had seen glimpses of her skill before, but the performance made them realize just how exceptional she was. They began to find small ways to encourage her, suggesting new songs to try, watching her with gentle pride, and offering little notes of encouragement on the piano to brighten her day. They never pressured her to perform more or seek fame. They only wanted her to continue growing in her own time, at her own pace. Despite the attention, she remained humble and focused. She began setting aside more time for practice, but not for the sake of showing off or gaining recognition. She experimented with complex melodies, combining soft, flowing passages with sudden bursts of energy. She explored rhythm in ways that challenged her fingers and mind, and she began composing small original pieces, letting her imagination dictate the direction of the music. Her piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a space for exploration, where she could test limits and find her own voice. One afternoon, a neighbor approached her with an invitation. A small cultural event was being organized at the town hall, featuring local talents. The neighbor suggested she perform again, but this time the crowd would be larger, and some visitors from nearby towns would attend. She considered it carefully. Performing for strangers was different. It came with more pressure, more expectations. Yet she felt ready. She did not seek approval or praise. She simply wanted to share her music. The invitation sparked a sense of excitement, and she accepted with quiet confidence, already imagining the melodies she could create. In the days leading up to the event, she devoted herself to preparation. She did not focus on practicing the same songs over and over, as most performers might. Instead, she explored new rhythms, experimented with unusual chord combinations, and refined the emotional depth of her playing. She thought about the audience she would face, not to please them, but to imagine how her music could touch hearts and stir feelings in ways words could not. Every day, she played for hours, often losing track of time, completely immersed in the music that seemed to flow naturally from her mind to her fingers. As the day of the event arrived, she dressed simply as always. She did not want her appearance to distract from the music, nor did she feel the need to impress anyone with style or glamour. She carried herself with calmness, focusing on the piano waiting for her at the town hall. The room was modest but filled with anticipation. Chairs were arranged neatly, and a small stage had been set up with a polished piano that gleamed under the lights. She touched the keys gently, feeling their smoothness, and let herself breathe, letting the music already inside her find its way out. When she began to play, the audience assumed she would perform something straightforward and gentle. They expected a continuation of the performance from the community center, something easy to listen to and forget about afterward. She started softly, just as they expected, letting the first few notes settle over the room. But as the music progressed, she introduced subtle variations, unexpected pauses, and intricate melodies that unfolded like a story. The audience leaned forward, sensing that something unusual was happening, though they did not yet understand the full depth of her skill. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, producing a sound that was both delicate and powerful. She navigated complex sequences effortlessly, blending emotion and technique in ways that captivated everyone present. Some of the visitors from nearby towns were musicians themselves, and their eyes widened in astonishment as they listened, recognizing the rare talent before them. Her music was no longer simply notes played on a piano. It had become a conversation, a dialogue that spoke to the hearts of everyone in the room. Throughout her performance, she remained fully focused, aware of every note, every pause, and every dynamic change. She did not rush or force the music, allowing it to grow naturally, taking the audience on a journey through sound. Some listeners closed their eyes, letting the music guide them. Others watched in silence, completely absorbed. The young woman played not for recognition or praise, but because the music demanded to be expressed, and she had learned to listen carefully to its call. When she finished, the room was filled with a moment of stunned silence. No one moved, as if afraid to break the spell that had been woven in the air. Then, slowly, applause began, growing louder and more enthusiastic with each passing second. People were on their feet, cheering, clapping, and expressing amazement. The neighbors who had first believed she could only play simple notes now understood that her talent was extraordinary, far beyond what anyone had imagined. Her parents were overwhelmed with pride, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they witnessed the recognition their daughter so richly deserved. After the performance, people approached her, offering compliments, questions, and admiration. Some wanted to know how she had learned to play with such skill, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief, unable to comprehend the depth of her talent. She accepted their words with quiet grace, feeling both joy and humility. She knew that the true reward was not the applause, but the opportunity to share her music, to communicate emotions that words could never capture. The experience left her inspired and motivated. She realized that while many had underestimated her, she had the power to surprise, to touch hearts, and to break through expectations with her music. The event also showed her that talent could remain hidden until the right moment, and that the courage to express oneself could open doors previously thought closed. From that day forward, she approached her music with renewed determination, ready to explore new techniques, create original compositions, and continue developing her unique voice. Her life returned to its quiet rhythm after the event, but she was no longer the same. The world had glimpsed a talent that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to shine. She continued practicing daily, experimenting with rhythms and melodies, discovering subtle details that made each performance richer than the last. People in the town began to pay more attention, some offering encouragement, others seeking advice or inspiration from her music. She welcomed their interest, but she never allowed it to change the core of her approach. Playing from the heart, exploring freely, and letting the piano speak. In those quiet moments at home, sitting at her old upright piano, she reflected on the journey she had begun. She thought about the assumptions people made, the expectations they held, and the joy of surpassing them in her own quiet way. Each note she played was a small victory, a message to herself and the world that true talent could not be confined or limited by anyone's perception. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a vessel for her creativity, a place where she could express feelings that could not be spoken, and a reminder that the most extraordinary things often appear in the most ordinary places. Her story continued quietly, each day a chance to grow, learn, and surprise. She knew that bigger challenges and opportunities lay ahead, but she faced them with calm confidence and a love for music that could never be diminished. The world had begun to notice, but she had already known the truth all along. Her music was a part of her, and as long as she continued to listen, practice, and create, it would always find a way to astonish, inspire, and touch the hearts of everyone who heard it. The day of the larger cultural event arrived, and the young woman felt a mixture of excitement and calm determination. She had grown used to performing, but this was different. The audience was larger, more diverse, and some people had traveled from other towns to attend. There was an air of anticipation in the room, and she could sense it the moment she stepped into the hall. The polished piano stood at the center of the small stage, its black and white keys gleaming under the bright lights. She walked over slowly, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface, feeling the smooth texture and the familiar resistance of the keys. This piano was different from the one at home, yet the connection she had with her instrument remained the same. As the performers before her finished their acts, the audience clapped politely, showing appreciation but with a sense of routine. Many expected the same from her, a pleasant performance of simple, familiar notes. She knew their expectations, and she did not mind them. Instead of trying to impress or shock, she focused on listening to the music inside her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe and prepare. The room quieted as she sat down, the hum of conversation fading away. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, feeling the energy of the moment flow through her. She began slowly, softly, as if testing the waters. The first few notes were gentle, familiar, and sweet. The audience smiled, some nodding in recognition of her talent, assuming they already knew what to expect. But then, almost imperceptibly, she introduced small variations. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence and precision, exploring melodies that twisted and turned in unexpected ways. She layered sounds delicately, letting harmonies grow naturally, creating depth and emotion that went far beyond simple notes. The audience began to notice the change. They had come expecting something ordinary, yet they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music swelled, moving through quiet, tender moments into crescendos of energy and passion. Each note seemed to tell a story, and the story was one they had never heard before. People leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the skill, the emotion, and the subtle beauty of her playing. Some closed their eyes, lost in the melody, while others watched, mesmerized, as her fingers flew across the keys with effortless grace. She played with total focus, each movement of her hands deliberate yet fluid. She did not rush. She allowed the music to unfold naturally, guiding the audience through different moods and feelings. She explored rhythm in ways that surprised the listeners, combining soft, flowing passages with sudden bursts of energy. The hall was filled with sound, but it was more than sound. It was a language, a way of communicating emotions that could not be put into words. Some in the audience were musicians themselves, and their eyes widened in recognition of the rare talent before them. They whispered to each other, astonished at the level of skill she displayed. The young woman's heart beat in time with the music, each note a reflection of her passion, her focus, and her creativity. She was not playing for applause or recognition. She was playing because the music demanded to be expressed. She had learned over the years that music was not about showing off or competing, but about connecting with something deeper, something universal. And in that moment, the connection between her, the piano, and the audience was undeniable. The performance grew even more intricate as she explored variations on familiar themes. She introduced unexpected chords, sudden pauses, and soft undertones that added richness and emotion. The audience could feel the intensity of her concentration and the depth of her expression. Children in the front row sat quietly, wide-eyed, sensing that they were witnessing something special. Adults leaned forward, some with tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they heard. Even those who had seen her perform before realized that they had only glimpsed a fraction of her talent. What started as a modest performance had transformed into a breathtaking journey through sound. At one point, she played a section so delicate and soft that the audience could hear a pin drop. The notes seemed to hang in the air, fragile and precious. Then, without warning, she shifted into a rapid, energetic passage, her fingers moving with lightning speed, creating a sense of excitement and wonder. The contrast between the quiet and the powerful sections made the performance feel alive, dynamic, and full of emotion. It was as if she was telling a story without words, a story that each person in the room interpreted in their own way, feeling emotions they could not describe. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, as the audience processed what they had just witnessed. Then it grew, louder and more enthusiastic, until the hall was filled with cheers, clapping, and expressions of astonishment. People stood up, unable to contain their admiration and amazement. They had expected simple notes, easy tunes to pass the time, and instead they had experienced a performance that moved their hearts and captured their imaginations. The young woman remained composed, accepting the appreciation with quiet humility. She smiled softly, knowing that the true reward was not in the applause, but in the ability to share something deeply meaningful. After the performance, people approached her with compliments, questions, and expressions of wonder. Some wanted to know how she had learned to play with such skill and emotion. Others simply shook their heads, amazed that someone so young could create such beautiful and complex music. She answered politely, humbly, explaining that she had practiced daily, explored melodies on her own, and always followed her heart. She emphasized that music was about feeling, listening, and expressing, not about impressing others. The event organizers were equally impressed. They had invited her to perform without knowing the full extent of her talent, and they realized they had made a wise choice. Some suggested that she perform at larger events in nearby towns, perhaps even in the city. She listened carefully, considering the opportunities, but she did not rush or make decisions lightly. Her focus remained on the music, on learning, and on developing her own voice. She knew that fame or recognition was not the ultimate goal. The joy and expression found in her playing were far more important. As she left the hall that evening, she felt a mixture of relief, joy, and determination. She had exceeded expectations, surprised the audience, and connected with people in a way that words could never achieve. Yet she also knew that this was just one step in a much larger journey. Her skills, her creativity, and her understanding of music continued to grow every day. She felt motivated to explore new techniques, to experiment with compositions, and to continue developing the depth and beauty of her playing. At home, she returned to her own piano, the one she had grown up with. Its keys were familiar, comforting, and full of memories. She played late into the night, experimenting with ideas that had come to her during the performance, trying out new rhythms, and exploring emotional nuances that she had not yet fully mastered. The quiet of the night allowed her to reflect on the experience, to consider what she had learned, and to dream about the possibilities ahead. Over the next few days, the town buzzed with talk of her performance. People shared stories of the event, describing how the young woman had transformed simple notes into something extraordinary. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves curious, eager to hear her play again. Some neighbors stopped by to listen, others offered encouragement, and a few younger students asked for guidance, inspired by her talent. She welcomed the interest but remained focused on her own path, understanding that true growth and skill came from dedication and passion, not from the expectations of others. She also took time to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. From practicing quietly in a modest home to performing in front of larger audiences, she recognized how far she had come. Yet she knew that there was still much to learn, much to explore, and much to express. Each performance was not an end, but a step forward, a chance to grow, improve, and touch more hearts with her music. She felt a quiet determination to continue, knowing that her talent, when guided by passion and dedication, could reach even greater heights. The young woman's life returned to its familiar rhythm, but now, there was a new sense of purpose. She practiced daily, experimented with compositions, and played with emotion and intent. People in the town and surrounding areas began to see her in a new light, no longer assuming she was ordinary. She remained humble, focusing on her love for music and the joy it brought her and others. Her piano had always been her sanctuary, and now it was also her voice, a way to share her inner world and connect with people in ways words could never achieve. With each passing day, her music grew richer, more expressive, and more intricate. She continued to surprise herself with new ideas, discovering hidden depths in her own talent. She realized that the path of a musician was never complete, that there was always more to learn, more to explore, and more to share. And she embraced that path fully, ready for every challenge, every performance, and every opportunity to let her music speak, confident that her piano could convey the extraordinary within her and touch the hearts of anyone who listened. After the cultural event, the young woman returned home, her mind still buzzing with the memory of the audience's reaction. The applause, the astonished expressions, the standing ovation. It was all vivid in her memory. She felt a quiet happiness, a sense of accomplishment that came not from recognition alone, but from knowing that she had truly shared her music with others. The experience had shown her how powerful music could be, how it could touch hearts and communicate emotions that words often failed to convey. She understood now that her skill was not just a personal achievement, but a bridge connecting her to people in ways she had never imagined. The days following the event were filled with reflection and learning. She practiced more diligently but also more thoughtfully. She did not play merely to perfect techniques or impress listeners. She played to explore the depth of her music, to experiment with variations, and to feel the emotion in each note. Her piano had always been a place of comfort, a friend that listened without judgment, but it had now become a stage where she could express herself fully, where the hidden power of her talent could emerge naturally. People from the town began approaching her in new ways. Some neighbors, who had only known her as quiet and reserved, were now curious and eager to listen. Children would peek through windows when they heard her practicing, trying to catch the delicate sounds that floated outside. Teachers and classmates at school expressed admiration, often asking questions about her techniques and her inspirations. Some older musicians even offered advice and encouragement, recognizing her potential and wanting to support her growth. She appreciated the interest but remained grounded, knowing that true skill was built over time, with patience, practice, and a love for the art. Her parents watched with pride and quiet amazement. They had always known she had talent, but the community's reaction confirmed what they had felt all along. They continued to support her, offering gentle guidance, suggesting new pieces to explore, and encouraging her to keep pushing herself, all while respecting her independence and the personal nature of her journey. They understood that this was her path, and they were grateful to witness her growth, even as they marveled at how her music could move people so profoundly. As word of her performance spread, invitations to play at other events began to arrive. A small music club in the next town wanted her to perform, a local cafe asked if she could play on weekends, and a regional festival extended an invitation for a feature performance. Each offer was exciting, but she approached them carefully. She considered her readiness, the message she wanted to share through her music, and the opportunities for learning and growth. She realized that while recognition was meaningful, it was the music itself that mattered most, the act of creation and connection that brought true fulfillment. In her private moments, she continued to explore her abilities. She would sit at the piano for hours, trying new combinations of notes, experimenting with rhythm, and composing original pieces. Some days, she would play softly, exploring subtle nuances and delicate melodies. Other days, her playing would be bold and powerful, full of energy and emotion that filled every corner of the room. She found joy in the exploration, in discovering new ways to express herself, and in realizing that the piano was not limited by the boundaries of technique, but only by the imagination and heart of the person playing it. During this period, she also began mentoring younger students who showed interest in music. They were often amazed at how she could teach them the fundamentals while also encouraging creativity and expression. She emphasized that playing an instrument was more than reproducing notes. It was about listening, feeling, and telling a story through music. She guided them patiently, showing them that dedication and passion could open doors to abilities they had not known existed. In helping others, she also learned more about herself and her own approach to music, deepening her understanding and skill. Her community began to see her differently. Where they had once assumed she could only play simple tunes, they now recognized her talent and potential. People began to speak about her performances with excitement and respect, often recalling the moments of awe they had felt during her cultural event. Even casual listeners who passed by her home would pause to hear her play, sensing the depth and beauty of her music. She appreciated the acknowledgement but remained focused on the essence of her art, valuing the impact her music could have over the attention it brought. One evening, after a long day of practice, she sat quietly at the piano, reflecting on how much she had grown. She thought about the people who had underestimated her, the friends and neighbors who assumed she could only play simple notes, and the audience that had been surprised by her performance. She realized that underestimation was a common experience for those with hidden talents, but it could also be an opportunity. It allowed her to grow quietly, to develop skills without the pressure of constant scrutiny, and to surprise others in ways that left a lasting impression. She smiled softly, appreciating how far she had come and the journey that still lay ahead. Her practice sessions became more than just a way to improve her skill. They became moments of self-discovery. She would play long into the night, exploring the emotional layers of each piece, experimenting with tempo, and finding new ways to express feelings. The piano became a mirror, reflecting her own growth and understanding of the world around her. Every note she played told a story, sometimes joyful, sometimes wistful, sometimes full of longing. She learned that music could communicate things that words could not, and that sharing these emotions could create a bond between performer and listener that was both powerful and lasting. As she continued to perform and practice, she also began thinking about her future. She dreamed of reaching wider audiences, of creating music that could touch people in far-off places, and of inspiring others to discover their own talents. Yet she never let ambition overshadow the joy of playing. She understood that true artistry was not measured by fame or recognition, but by the sincerity and emotion with which it was expressed. Each performance, each practice session, and each composition was a step forward, a way to grow, learn, and connect with the world through music. People in the community began to realize that her talent was rare and extraordinary. They admired not only her skill but also her dedication, humility, and willingness to share what she had learned with others. She became a source of inspiration, especially for young musicians who looked up to her as a role model. They saw that talent, when combined with passion and hard work, could overcome assumptions and expectations, and that quiet dedication could lead to moments of awe and wonder. The young woman also began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt more confident in her abilities, more aware of the power of her music, and more connected to the world around her. She had learned to listen carefully, not just to the piano, but to the emotions and reactions of those who heard her play. This awareness enriched her performances, allowing her to play with greater depth, sensitivity, and expression. She realized that music was a conversation, a way to communicate feelings and stories without words, and that each performance was an opportunity to connect with others in a profound and meaningful way. Through it all, she remained humble. She understood that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, patience, and love for the art were equally important. She continued to practice, to explore, and to perform with sincerity and passion. Every note she played carried a piece of herself, her experiences, her emotions, and her imagination. And through her music, she touched the hearts of everyone who listened, leaving an impression that lingered long after the final note had faded. In quiet moments at home, she reflected on the journey so far. From a young girl quietly playing on a worn piano, underestimated by friends, neighbors, and even herself, to a musician capable of inspiring and moving others with her skill, she had grown in ways she could not have imagined. She understood that every step, every practice session, every performance was part of a larger journey of discovery and expression. She embraced the challenges, celebrated the successes, and remained committed to the music that had always been her closest companion. As she sat at the piano late into the night, experimenting with new compositions and exploring the emotional depths of each piece, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had surpassed expectations, touched hearts, and discovered her own voice, but she knew that the journey was far from over. There were still melodies to explore, stories to tell, and emotions to express. With each note, she continued to grow, not only as a musician but as a person, learning more about herself, her art, and the power of music to connect people in ways that words could never achieve. The young woman understood that the reaction of the audience was only a part of the story. The real transformation had happened within her. The discovery of her own abilities, the confidence to express herself fully, and the joy of connecting with others through the universal language of music. She had learned that talent, when nurtured with patience, dedication, and love, could exceed expectations, break barriers, and inspire everyone who encountered it. And with that understanding, she looked forward to the future, ready to explore, create, and share her music with the world, knowing that every note played carried the essence of her journey, her growth, and her heart. The young woman's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined, but she remained grounded, knowing that her journey with music was far from over. After the events in the town and surrounding areas, she began to receive invitations to perform at larger gatherings. Each invitation was a chance to share her music with more people, to inspire others, and to continue exploring her own talent. Yet she approached these opportunities with care, choosing venues and performances that aligned with her desire to express genuine emotion rather than to impress. Her reputation grew slowly but steadily. People in nearby towns began to speak of the pianist whose performances were filled with passion and depth. Musicians who had once doubted her ability became admirers, often attending her performances to witness the skill and emotion she brought to every note. Local newspapers mentioned her, not in grand headlines, but with a quiet respect for her artistry and the effect her music had on the audience. She accepted the recognition gracefully, but her focus remained on creating, exploring, and sharing her music with sincerity. At home, she continued her routine of practice and discovery. The old piano, worn but familiar, remained a sanctuary. Each day, she challenged herself with new compositions, sometimes inspired by the beauty of nature outside her window, sometimes by emotions she felt deeply but could not express in words. She experimented with tempo, rhythm, and melody, finding ways to evoke feelings in listeners that were unique to her own perspective. Her practice sessions were immersive, often lasting for hours, during which she lost herself entirely in the flow of music. She also began to mentor others more regularly. Young students who showed an interest in music would come to her for guidance. She taught them not just technical skills, but the importance of emotion, expression, and patience. She emphasized that music was a conversation, a way to communicate feelings that could not be captured by words alone. Watching her students grow and develop their own voices brought her immense satisfaction, reinforcing the idea that talent could inspire and transform beyond personal accomplishment. Opportunities to perform at larger venues began to appear. A cultural festival in the city invited her to play, offering a stage where musicians from different regions would showcase their talent. She approached this with excitement but also with calm focus. She spent weeks preparing, not only practicing pieces she had mastered, but also creating new compositions that reflected her growth and emotional depth. She wanted each performance to be authentic, a true representation of her musical journey. On the day of the festival, she arrived early, taking a moment to observe the audience gathering. There was a mix of musicians, music lovers, and curious attendees, all eager to experience the performances. She felt a sense of anticipation, but not nervousness. She trusted her preparation, her ability, and the connection she had with the piano. Sitting at the instrument, she allowed herself a few moments of quiet, feeling the keys beneath her fingers and letting the music in her mind flow freely. As she began to play, the audience listened attentively. The initial notes were soft and deliberate, drawing listeners in with a sense of calm expectation. Then, gradually, she introduced variations, intricate passages, and emotional depth that captured the room. Each note was a reflection of her experiences, emotions, and imagination. The performance unfolded like a story, guiding the audience through quiet, reflective moments and powerful, energetic crescendos. People were captivated, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound, others watching in awe as her fingers danced across the keys. The impact of her music was profound. Listeners were moved, some to tears, others to quiet contemplation. The young woman had learned that the power of music lay not in technical perfection alone, but in the sincerity and emotion that could be conveyed through each note. Her ability to communicate these feelings created a connection with the audience that was immediate and lasting. The applause at the end was enthusiastic and heartfelt, but she understood that the true success was in the experience shared between performer and listener. After the performance, people approached her with admiration and curiosity. Some musicians asked about her techniques and inspirations, while audience members expressed how deeply they had been affected by the music. She accepted the praise with humility, often redirecting attention to the emotion and storytelling behind the notes rather than to her own skill. She had learned that music was not a competition but a form of connection, and sharing it authentically was more meaningful than seeking recognition. The festival performance marked a turning point in her journey. She began to understand the broader impact of her music, the way it could inspire others, change perceptions, and bring people together. She felt a responsibility to continue developing her talent, not for fame, but for the joy of expression and the opportunity to touch lives. Each composition, each practice session, and each performance became a step in a lifelong journey of exploration and creativity. Back at home, she reflected on the experiences that had brought her to this point. From a quiet life in a small town, underestimated and overlooked, she had grown into a musician capable of moving people and inspiring others. She thought about the moments of doubt, the assumptions made by those around her, and the perseverance that had allowed her to develop her skills. She understood that talent alone was not enough. It required dedication, patience, and a willingness to explore beyond the familiar. She continued to compose original music, blending influences from her surroundings, emotions, and imagination. Some pieces were joyful, reflecting the beauty of nature or moments of happiness. Others were introspective, exploring feelings of longing, challenge, or reflection. Each composition was a journey, and she poured herself into every note, ensuring that the music remained a true expression of her thoughts and heart. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a mirror of her own growth and creativity. Through her performances and compositions, she also became a source of inspiration. Young musicians and listeners who had once assumed talent was reserved for a select few began to see the possibilities in themselves. She showed that dedication, love for one's craft, and the courage to express oneself could surpass expectations and inspire those around you. She mentored, guided, and encouraged others, knowing that sharing knowledge and passion could create ripples that extended far beyond her immediate surroundings. Her parents continued to support her quietly, proud of her achievements and the way she had grown into her talent. They admired her humility, dedication, and the joy she found in music. They knew that the journey was not just about performances or recognition, but about the connection and expression she had cultivated through her art. They encouraged her to continue exploring, performing, and sharing, always respecting the personal and emotional nature of her path. As time passed, she accepted more invitations to perform, not seeking fame but embracing opportunities to reach new audiences. Each performance reinforced what she had always known. Music was a powerful language, capable of expressing what words could not, creating bonds between people and leaving lasting impressions. Her ability to move people through sound became a defining aspect of her journey, and she cherished every moment she spent at the piano, sharing her gift with the world. She also continued to develop her original compositions, sometimes recording them to preserve the emotion and beauty she had created. These recordings allowed her music to reach people beyond her immediate community, touching hearts in distant places and inspiring other musicians to pursue their passions. She understood that her talent was not limited to live performances. It could be shared in many ways, always carrying the essence of her dedication, creativity, and emotional expression. Looking back, she realized that the path from being underestimated to becoming recognized for her skill was more than just a story of talent. It was a story of patience, perseverance, and the courage to continue when others did not understand. Every moment of practice, every quiet reflection at the piano, and every performance had shaped her, not just as a musician, but as a person. She had learned to value sincerity, emotional depth, and the joy of creating and sharing music above all else. In the quiet of her home, she often played late into the night, experimenting with new melodies, exploring rhythms, and refining compositions. Each session was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to express herself fully. She had discovered that music was a lifelong journey, one that could always evolve, surprise, and connect people in ways that nothing else could. The piano had become an extension of herself, a tool for communication, reflection, and inspiration. Her story, from the modest beginnings of simple notes to the discovery of her extraordinary talent, became an inspiration not just to those who watched her perform, but to anyone who had ever been underestimated or doubted. She proved that dedication, passion, and belief in oneself could overcome expectations and create moments of profound beauty. She continued to play, to compose, and to share, knowing that her music had the power to touch hearts, inspire dreams, and remind people of the extraordinary possibilities that exist within each of us. Through all of this, she remained humble, focused, and driven by the joy of music itself. The applause, the recognition, and the admiration were welcome, but they were secondary to the connection she felt with her piano and the emotions she could share through her playing. Each note she played carried meaning, every performance was a journey, and every composition was a story waiting to be discovered. She had learned that the true magic of music was not just in the skill it displayed, but in the power it had to move, inspire, and unite people. As she looked toward the future, she felt excitement and readiness for all the possibilities that awaited her. More performances, new compositions, and opportunities to inspire others were on the horizon. Yet she knew that the essence of her journey would remain the same: a love for music, a dedication to growth, and a commitment to sharing her gift with sincerity and heart. Her piano would always be there, a faithful companion through every step of her journey, and she knew that as long as she played with passion and honesty, her music would continue to touch lives in ways words could never achieve.